Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little. I'm here today with another fun hand for PokerNews.com. This is, again, from that small fielded $2,000 buy-in tournament that I played recently. And we get King 9 of diamonds under the gun with 25,000 chips at 75-150 and elect to raise. We are playing 8-handed at the moment, so folding is certainly reasonable. I'm not a big fan of hands like King 9, King 8 suited, etc. from early position. If it was offsuit, I would definitely fold. But I don't mind splashing around from time to time either. So I do make it 400. We get called by the low jack seat, who is a tight aggressive player. Button also calls. And big blind calls. So we see it four ways, which is not really the end of the world. I know I'm trying to make a good hand. I'm not trying to make top pair no kicker or anything like that. So flop comes 9-8-7, one diamond, which gives me top pair and backdoor flush draw, which is pretty good. That said, this is a board that should connect well with pretty much all of the callers' ranges, right? They could easily have Jack 10 for just the nuts. They could also have 9-8, 8-7, 9-7 suited. They could have pocket 9s, 8-7s. As you see, we lose to pretty much everything that gives us action. So in this scenario, I think you probably want to bet with the idea that we are folding if we get raised. Clearly, I would also bet here with that same range I just gave all my opponents. So I need to have some hands that I'm betting for value/protection that I also don't mind folding if I get raised, and I think this one is probably it. So pot's 1,700. I like to bet 900, which I think is fine. I can maybe even go a little bit bigger given the board is so coordinated. Only the button cut off high. The low jack seat calls, the tight aggressive guy, which is not really what I want, but it's what we get. And the turn is a 10 of diamonds, giving me the flush draw. So now I have middle pair and a flush draw, but any jack is a straight, any 6 is a straight, and we still just could be behind, right? So the question is, do we want to bet this or check call? And I don't really know. In the most recent hand that I made for Poker News, we had a flush draw and turn middle pair, and I discussed how with that middle pair, we have a lot of showdown value, so we should be checking because that's usually what we're going to have by the river. Here we have middle pair, and we're usually going to have middle pair by the river, but I'm not so sure this middle pair is good. Like, if we had an 8 or a 7 instead, I think we should definitely bluff. But with the 9, it's very much on the borderline between having showdown value and not. Because really, what is this tight aggressive guy calling my flop bet with that I am happy about right now? I mean, he could have queen 9, I guess. But notice every other 9 that makes sense pre-flop beats me. If he had a random 10, like ace 10, well, that beats me. If he had a jack, like jack 9 suited, well, that beats me. You see, I'm losing to almost everything. So maybe this is still just a bluff. I don't know. It's definitely close, I think. So pot's 3,500. If I'm going to bet, I probably need to bet with the idea of betting again on the river to try to get him off of sets in 2 pairs. But I don't know if I need to do that in this scenario, especially since the opponent just has all the nuts in his range. So I think I'm going to check and look to check call. It does go check, check, so that's good. I probably don't have the best hand very often, but at least I didn't have to face a bet. Now the river is a jack of spades, so there is a straight on the board. Jack 10, 9, 8, 7. Okay. What you want to ask in this scenario is, do I have many queens in my range? And you need to be realistic, of course. I could certainly have pocket queens. That's a hand I would definitely bet the flop with. I could have queen 10 suited, but there aren't very many combinations of that. I could have perhaps ace queen of diamonds, hearts, or spades. Those are cards hands I may bet on the flop. I could also have king queen, spades, diamonds, hearts. But it's kind of a stretch to think I have too many queens in this scenario. Next question is, does the opponent have very many queens? Well, he did call my flop bet, right? So he could certainly have queen jack, queen 10, queen 9. That's about it, right? He probably doesn't have pocket queens. He probably 3-bet that pre-flop, although some people do just call with it, which is a fine play. So maybe pocket queens. So when we list off those combinations, you see it's kind of 50-50. And if it's roughly 50-50, this is a spot where I think we don't mind bluffing. Especially, very importantly, we know that we essentially chop or lose if we check. If we check and the opponent bets, now we're in that situation where we're stuck in here with a bluff catcher, but I think if we bet, that puts our opponent in that scenario, and clearly if we get raised or whatever, we're going to fold. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that when we bet, we essentially never get raised. Because if we get raised, we're going to be folding out a chop sometimes, and that is a disaster. So how much should we bet to ensure we don't get raised, while also applying pressure to the hands like, the straight on board, right? The straight on board is what we're trying to get the opponent to fold. How much do we have to bet to make the opponent fold the chop? And I think the answer is definitely a lot. If we bet 1,000, let's say, the opponent has to put in 1,000 to win half of the pot, which would be 1,700. And the opponent's probably going to win definitely often enough to justify calling that. So a small bet doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and we're just going to get called every time. And like I said, we may induce a raise, which would be very annoying. I think we need to bet large, though. I think if we even bet pot, we're probably going to get called a decent chunk of the time with a chop. So I think we need to go more than the size of the pot. Clearly, when we are against a queen, it's very unfortunate, but we shouldn't be against the queen too often, especially given the opponent called our preflop raise, so it's probably not hands like queen 10 offsuit and queen jack offsuit, given our opponent's probably a reasonable tight aggressive player. So it's just going to be the suited combinations. So there's only three queen jacks, 3 queen 10s, 3 queen 9s, and I guess 6 pocket queens if he has those, if he doesn't 3-bet them. So there really isn't very many combinations of hands. It's only 15, compared to all of the combinations of 2 pairs, top pairs, middle pairs, 10s, etc. that the opponent could have. So I think betting here is going to get a lot of folds if I bet very large. And what do? I do decide to go for 5,000, so over the size of the pot, and I think this is good. Like I said, if our opponent's range is 15 combinations of queens, and then who knows how many combinations of all the other stuff, at least 60 or something like that, then we're going to be getting folds a large chunk of the time, and that's going to show a nice profit. Now, if the opponent calls our 5,000 every time with a chop, well, then clearly this bet's just lighting money on fire. So you want to make sure you're using this play against players who actually are capable of folding. If they're not going to fold ever, then, well, we certainly don't want to do this, because now we're just either chopping or we lose. In that scenario, we want to be more inclined to check. But even then, if we check and our opponent bets 5,000, now we're in this spot we're putting him in, and that's certainly not where we want to be. So it's an interesting spot. We do go 5,000, and the opponent folds. So it worked this time. When it works this time, it's always very nice. It makes you think the play is at least reasonable. And it's always good when it works out.